Arrival. Take it away.
AV team all good? Yep. Great. I like sleep. No, really, getting a good night's sleep is just the best. I mean, I wake up when my body is done, I get some coffee, I know that my batteries are charged to 100% and I can get going and be productive with my day. I can get up, get some exercise, start work, and I know that I'm going to be operating at the best that I can be. And when I'm productive and happy, I get things done, and that's great. But when I'm tired, I don't operate well when I'm tired. I'm unable to focus, I can't physically see things properly, and it really inhibits my ability to be productive. So when I get paged in the middle of the night as an operations engineer, I'm tired. I am not going to be operating at my best. And if I'm getting paged at 3 a.m, stuff be broken, yo. I need to get it fixed. So what I need to do is to set myself up so I can be the best I can be when the pager inevitably will go off at 3 a.m. Because a 3 a.m. pager as an operations engineer will probably happen. I mean, you can be lucky enough to have a proper on-call rotation, follow the sun. If you have that, good for you. I've never had that. But this may not be an actual 3 a.m. pager. A lot of these tips you can apply if you're sick, if you're having to multitask. These are just things to be kind to yourself. And if we have time at the end, these are all from my experiences. If we have time at the end, we can open up the floor and you can share your experiences. But these are my experiences. I am an operations engineer. I'm not your operations engineer. So because this is a talk, it has to have sections, and there's going to be 3 of these. I'm going to cover essentials, next steps, and feedback. So, essential documentation. You should really write stuff down. I hear it's really useful. Keeping stuff in your head is bad because other people are going to keep stuff in their head. And when it's 3 a.m, their heads are not going to be available. So having stuff written down is good. But where to have that written down is absolutely critical. You could go whole hog and create a full knowledge database and documentation management system, but that requires buy-in and resources and management approval, and sometimes you just can't get that. The page is going to keep going off, and it'll take how long to get one of these systems in place? What you need is somewhere where you can just throw notes down, and I'm talking if you're in a smaller team here. If you're in a bigger team with follow the sun and have resources, good for you. You continue doing that thing. I hope you never have to be on call at 3 a.m. again. I'm not so lucky. Places that you could throw notes down. You can throw notes in a wiki on your GitHub or under your username in your Confluence page or something. But where you start documenting things that you might want to need at 3 a.m. is really important, and it has to have features. You have to have somewhere that you can document that's editable. I mean, well, yes, duh. But this is really important because at 3 a.m, you're going to be wanting something that is there, that has your entire tool chest that you can just pick up, throw in, edit, what have you. So if you have your documentation in a repo that has to have PRs that have to be approved, that's not going to work too well. It's not going to scale. You're going to want to have something that you can edit at any time. You're also going to want to have something searchable because at 3 a.m, I keep on saying 3 a.m, it's such a good term because 3 a.m. just has that fear instilled into it. At 3 a.m, you're not going to be able to find that notebook that's sitting on your office desk with the keywords that you need to search whatever documentation it is to find what you're looking for. This is really important when you're, say, doing pager from a conference. You're going to need something that you can search at any time of day, no matter where you are in the world. What's really super useful is if you have one of these searchable indexes, like Confluence. In a search browser, you can have a custom search engine and you can start having keywords. So I can go wiki keywords and it will search my Confluence or my GitHub wiki, and that's super useful for me because it means that I can start having sort of a process where I go Control T, new tab, type, blah, and if I do that enough, I start automatically doing that at 3 a.m. And that kind of muscle memory is something that still works at 3 a.m., I found. Probably wherever you're going to be storing this, probably should be behind a company firewall, just saying. I mean, Rory's keynote from this morning, yes, having all that documentation is really great. Pretty sure his AWS keys aren't on that repo. But it needs to be discoverable as well, especially by your coworkers, because if you've been creating a cache, having that cache discoverable by the other person on your on-call rotation, hopefully you have somebody else on your on-call rotation, but if you have someone else on there, they should be able to find your stuff and possibly collaborate. But the question is, what do you write down? What do you want to be able to discover at 3 a.m.? That's going to depend on your environment. Are you a Docker shop? Do you do Kubernetes? Is there a lot of network appliances happening? What's going to be super useful for you when you're half awake and you need something that can search through the current stopped Docker containers because you have a full disk somewhere on an EC2 instance? Those esoteric actions that are going to be hard to compile from first principles in your CLI at whatever AM. Things that aren't useful to be aliased also. Things that you want to have accessible. Your nice cleaver and your nice chisel, as an analogy. Having these as copy-pastable commands that are really simple to use as part of your debugging processes is so helpful. And you also want to make sure that whatever tools that you have in this little wonderful bucket repository aren't dangerous. Because having just something simple as having an environment variable that has to be declared before you can run your command may not work. And you may sit there at 4:30 in the morning going, why isn't it finding any Docker containers? Oh, right, I haven't declared what region I'm in. Worse is if you have a nice little cache which has all these pipe commands at the end, and then you don't see that there's an xargs delete at the end of your pipeline, or there's a DD copy to SDA that you don't know what it does and you try running it and you break your entire laptop. These are all based on real experiences. But the tools that you have, it's going to depend on your environment. I'm an operations engineer, I'm not your operations engineer. But these are the kind of things that hopefully get you start thinking about what kind of things would be useful to you. And don't run with scissors, because, you know, stab. So now that you've started thinking about the initial basics, what to put, where to put it, you need to start thinking about stepping up this cache repository. At this point, in my head, I've done this many times now, I have a great big long Confluence page separated into sections. I've got Ansible things, I've got Puppet things, I've got whatever else. How can I use this and share it and make it integrated into my rotation system? Because integration is so, so useful. You've got different levels of integration here, but having something like moving a page from my personal Confluence into an SRE section and having that linked on the top of the Firehose channel in Slack, that could be really useful. Having it turn up when you get notifications that you're about to be on call, that could be useful. It depends on your system. But having it available and visible, especially when you're not the person that created it, you can discover these things and it's useful. Another big bonus is not just linking to your giant cache, but having it contextual. One fleet I maintained had a bunch of different machines across different operating systems and different virtualization types. There were colo boxes, there were RAID servers, there was VMware, KVM, Xen, Linux, Windows, all the different versions in between. Depending on the server and the service that was exploding, it would be really useful to have contextual information there. And we were really lucky because we had Nagios and we were able to customize it so when a specific alert turned up, there was a little link that would link back to our Moin Moin wiki, and depending on what service it would link to the most contextually important information for that service. If it was a specific server, it would show, hey, this is a special server. If it was a service, so say CPU on a Windows machine, here's a whole bunch of stuff. Here's Task Manager, have you heard of it? Those kind of things are super simple and so good to set up, so when it's just like, oh, it's an alert, ooh, documentation. At 3 a.m. you're not working at your best, so having a nice little, hey, like Clippy turning up at 3 a.m., so good. Which brings me to another important point. A lot of this stuff is going to be choose your own adventure based on what encounters you have. And making sure that you loop back when you have issues and making sure that you update your documentation after events occur is the only way that you're going to evolve this documentation cache. It could be something as simple as storing the sanitized version of your bash history into your base cache, or making sure that the senior SRE that handled the alert documents how they fixed it. That hasn't happened to me before. Yes, it has happened to me before. Because that's how juniors learn, and it's that feedback loop that turns junior engineers into senior engineers. These caches don't appear overnight. Senior engineers don't grow on trees, they evolve from juniors. And making sure that we have this recurring feedback loop of learning and teaching is how you end up evolving an exceptionally strong team of engineers. Having a cache of flags that's just a copy from a README of a CLI isn't going to help. Having useful things where you can point out that, oh, this server on this day of the month happens to have this issue, that is super useful, especially when you can't actually fix it. But the recurring issues, these are the things that you start having a cache of, because a lot of places don't have follow the sun. A lot of places deal with customer servers, and a lot of times you can't fix the root issue, so you need to know the most efficient and effective way to fix it. Because anyone knows who's been doing ops or engineering for an amount of time, there's an XKCD wonderful thing that says, how long will it take to automate and how much time will I save? And if you end up with a copy-pastable reboot all the servers script, as opposed to creating an entire fresh spin-up green-blue infrastructure, your restart script is going to be useful and it's going to save you time and it's going to make sure you go back to sleep. Green-blue, if you can get the buy-in to do it, great, do that. Fix your infrastructure. But until then, having something that's going to make sure you can get back to sleep is great. And it may not be a copy-paste script. You may work out that maybe you want to have log rotation to fix that disk space thing that's happening every day, or have a scheduled task instead, or have something that checks every once in a while whether something's broken and automatically fixing it. The engineering time it takes to create these solutions versus how much time it saves the on-call engineer, it's always going to be a balance, it's always going to depend on your environment. But having the documentation when issues happen, and then evolving that documentation to work out workarounds, and then evolving that into fixes, this is how things get better. And applying these automations into your infrastructure scripts would also be super useful, like adding it into an Ansible playbook that you can just click, or integrating it into your setup scripts to make sure that you have log rotation deployed on servers, because if you don't, you may miss it. Taking your bag of tricks and turning them into solutions is just one way you can make sure your infrastructure gets better. And in all of this, as I've said before, it's all about learning, because you're going to learn how your environment operates, but you're learning it. Your other on-call engineers may not be, your juniors may not be. So teaching them what's going on is super useful, especially when they start getting the pager. Being able to learn the weather of your environment makes it so easy. It maybe moves it from a part of your brain that actually works at 3 a.m., I've found. When it starts making sense so you're not stressing out, makes sure that you can operate at the best of your ability. And again, the whole we'll fix it soon thing. Nothing gets fixed overnight. Sure, you can learn about Kubernetes at linux.conf.au, Australia, but you're not going to have Kubernetes spun up in your organisation next Tuesday. Until then, you have to keep the old stuff running. But once you finally do get that Kubernetes set up, making sure that you actually update your documentation to make sure that, oh, this command isn't going to work anymore. That is super useful. This documentation cache is going to be ever evolving, which is why it needs to be editable and searchable and discoverable, et cetera, et cetera. And making sure that when you finally get those infrastructure changes in place, that you can delete the old documentation that's no longer relevant. Making sure that is communicated across your team. That hasn't happened before. Bonus points if you're on a distributed team, actually taking the time to make sure that there's a physical handover. That is super useful as well. And as a small side note here, because I might actually be on time, this is great. Showing empathy for your fellow engineer is really, really useful because they then show empathy to you and they will actively make sure that you get a full night's sleep. They may actually start doing things like, if they're doing infrastructure changes, taking the pager. That way, if something explodes, you don't get woken up. And it's that feedback loop of making sure that people are thinking of each other and not just thinking of, oh, I want to replace this with this cool thing. No, I want to make sure that Katie gets sleep. Because the less pages and alerts that happen, the more everyone gets a good night's sleep and they're productive and they're useful the next day. Because working on a team is hard. If you're already doing on-call, you're working out of hours, and that's tough. But practicing explicit empathy makes sure that it's easier for everyone involved. So you're not your best when you're tired, and you're doing your future self a really huge favour by starting on that bag of tricks and then evolving from there. And I have a few minutes left, so I would love to open the floor for a little bit of open discussion about things that maybe you've experienced in your on-call or in your operations that I may not have covered because my experiences are my own. I would love it if anyone had any thoughts, comments. I'm explicitly allowing comments. My gosh. So we have a runner who's also an organizer. Please tell me about your experiences.
My experience was running an IT company servicing SMEs, and I would, if the pager went off in the middle of the night, whoever was holding the pager got $100 on their desk each morning.
Pager duty sucks.
For the benefit of the recording, that was pager duty sucks.
Bearing in mind I charged the client $150 if they dialed the pager.
Not actually a question per se, but I'd like the rest of my team who aren't here to be able to hear your presentation, which I thought was excellent.
You know what's really good? They're recording it.
Yeah, how do you get access to those?
It'll be on the YouTube channel, youtube.com, linux.conf.au, whatever year it is, and probably about this time tomorrow they'll start going up from today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Cheers.
No worries. There was one over here as well.
So outside of sysadminning, I also volunteer with my local fire department. And so it's been interesting to learn from them the strategies that they have for being functional when the pager goes off at 2, 3, 4 in the morning and it might be life or death or something's literally on fire. And a couple of the things that I've picked up from them that really help are labeling everything. And what you said about the putting the link in the page when appropriate or in the alert that you get, just seems really an ingenious way of bringing that back to tech to me. And the other thing is to do it in the daylight whenever you can, to practice what will I do if and when this happens in the middle of the night. And as a junior, more junior sysadmin, I like seeking mentorship from my more senior people, saying, okay, what are the ways in which you've seen this break before? What's the best way to attack it and the best way to troubleshoot it? And explicitly having those conversations is a way of doing a dry run when you are conscious, so that you recognize it. You don't feel quite so lost when it's the middle of the night.
And there are so many other talks about this kind of stuff. Most of what I've said is based on my own experiences, but there is Andrew Godwin talking about lessons from aviation. There's also Daniele Piccona, who's done one on documentation quadrants. There's so many more good resources, but hopefully I was able to show some practical and next Monday tips, which is something that a lot of things at these conferences, they're like, ooh, shiny ideas, but I like things that I can actually implement. So, how much more time do I have? Just one more or? Okay, cool. You're in
Probably
charge.
reiterating, but there's a project called IPXE, and every single error message is also a link to their wiki page. And I really, really like that approach.
Yes.
I think there's one more up.
And then there might be one more over here if we have time.
Okay. Your point about, I think you had a slide saying run a retro sort of thing. My favorite meetings at work are after an incident, going into the post-incident review. Those are by far the best meetings we have at work, where you sit down and you say, what was the impact to our users? And you just break it down into, was there cultural things that meant that we didn't respond in the right way at the time? Or how can we improve our learning and monitoring of the things? And I think that's a really important part of a feedback loop.
Yeah.
And it's a really good opportunity to involve your developers and more junior engineers as well, and other people who are otherwise potentially interested or should be interested in future.
Integrating the developers and the operations people is really cool. There should be a name for that.
Short?
Ops dev, yeah. I think one more over there if we have time.
One short.
No, DevOps is a really good thing. There's entire conferences on DevOps, but yes.
Thanks so much for the talk. There is one thing that now my developers are on call. They're the first ones to receive the alerts, and they just call us if it is an infrastructure problem. But one thing that is pretty common knowledge for ops and is not for developers is just write down every command, every thought that you have during 3 a.m. outages, and the output of that command as well. Because in the morning, we had no idea because you went to sleep halfway through. And sometimes you made a mistake, a very small mistake because you were sleeping. But in the morning, you can actually catch. So just document everything. It's going to make the post-mortem so much easier to understand.
Docker status versus Docker stats. One U, completely different output. Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Well,